In the frozen skies above a forgotten Soviet airbase, a young American helicopter pilot trusted a routine maintenance ritual with his life. But on a day where the cold could freeze hell itself, a simple act, the cleaning of a single machine gun, unleashed a chain reaction so precise and terrifying that it defied every ounce of his skill. This is not a tale of enemy fire, but of a silent, mechanical betrayal waiting in the wings, where survival hinged on a piece of cloth no bigger than a man's palm. The Afghan wind didn't blow. It screamed. It tore across the high desert plateau of Bagram Air Base, a gritty, punishing force that carried the fine dust of ages into every crevice, every gear, every soul. It was the winter of 1987, and the war against the Soviet occupation was a distant rumble in the mountains for the men of the 101st Airborne. For Chief Warrant Officer Mike Brenner, the war was a more immediate, tactile thing. It was the aircraft he flew, the machine he nursed and cursed and loved. His H-64 Apache attack helicopter, a beast of snarling engines, complex electronics, and cold, brutal firepower. Today, the beast was grounded. A technical directive had come down, a mandatory inspection of the aircraft's 30mm M230 chain gun, mounted solidly under the chin of the chopper. It wasn't a weapon you fired lightly. It was a building eater, a tank killer, a single, shuddering BRRT that could change the fate of a valley. And like any precision instrument of death, it demanded respect and meticulous care. Sergeant First Class David Kowalski, Brenner's dedicated crew chief, was that respect personified. A man built like a barrel, with hands that could be surprisingly delicate. Kowalski lived for his bird. The Apache wasn't Army property to him. It was his charge, and Brenner was merely the privileged driver. The hangar was a cacophony of echoing metal and shouted orders, but around Brenner's Apache, there was a bubble of focused quiet. Kowalski had the gun's access panels open, the massive ammunition feed system exposed. The chain gun's mechanism was a marvel of engineering, using a motorized chain to drive the bolt back and forth, feeding, firing, and ejecting shells with robotic efficiency. But that chain and the guide rails it ran on needed to be spotless. A single grain of sand, a fleck of hardened carbon, could cause a jam. And a jam in a helicopter that often flew nose down, hunting targets, could be catastrophic. Gonna give her the full spa treatment, Chief, Kowalski grunted, wiping his oily hands on a rag already stained beyond redemption. This Afghan powder gets into everything. Like the damn stuff's alive. Brenner, leaning against a workbench with a mug of tepid coffee, nodded. He trusted Kowalski implicitly. Just make sure she kisses on the first date, Kowalski. Intel's chattering about a big convoy moving through the Tagaw Valley. We might be on the menu tomorrow. She'll sing for you, sir. Don't you worry. The cleaning process was ritualistic. Kowalski used approved solvents and a cascade of lint-free rags. He worked the chain, meticulously wiping each link, each guide rail, until the metal shone with a dull, purposeful gleam. The final step was lubrication. He reached for the bottle of Mil 87177, the specific thin grease mandated for the chain. Applying it with a careful brush, he coated the rails. The grease was clear and slick, designed to function in the brutal temperature swings from the Afghan summer to this biting winter. As he finished, a stray thought, born of 1,000 military briefings on readiness, crossed his mind. Protect the work. He glanced at the open panels, the gleaming gun mechanism. Overnight, the hangar doors would be open, the dust would creep in. He needed to cover his work. His eyes scanned the cluttered bench. The official, fitted canvas covers were in the supply depot, signed out to another crew. He saw a pile of clean, white shop rags, soft, absorbent cotton. Perfect. He took one, a square about the size of a handkerchief, and gently draped it over the portion of the gun's mechanism where the chain met the most critical guide rail. It settled softly. He closed the heavy access panels, locking them down with their fasteners. The white cloth was now out of sight, a tiny, unseen guest nestled against the heart of the weapon system. It was an act of pride, of diligence. A patch to keep the dust off. Kowalski patted the Apache's nose. All tucked in, sweetheart. The next morning dawned brittle and clear, a perfect day for hunting. Brenner's mind was already in the cockpit, running through threat scenarios and weapon profiles. His co-pilot gunner, a young lieutenant named Andy Cross, was doing his own pre-flight, his face a mask of concentrated excitement. They performed their walk-around, but the inspection was visual, checking for fluid leaks, loose panels, damaged sensors. The sealed gun panels showed nothing amiss. Kowalski gave them a thumbs up from the hangar door. "She's clean, gentlemen. Go get him." The twin turbines of the Apache whined to life, building into a deafening, powerful scream that vibrated in their chests. The rotors began to turn, slowly at first, then blurring into a disk that churned the dusty air. Brenner felt the familiar, eager lift as the wheels left the ground. The Apache climbed swiftly, Bagram falling away into a Lego grid below. They formed up with a second Apache, call sign Viking 2-2, and a pair of Scout OH-58 Kiowas. The mission was straightforward. Find a reported Soviet convoy, assess its strength, and if commanded, engage. For an hour, they raced low over the stark, wrinkled landscape, following dry riverbeds and skirting ridgelines. The cold at altitude seeped through the cockpit's heaters. Finally, the Kiowa scout's voice crackled over the radio. "Viking lead, this is Scout 1. Eyes on. Multiple BTRs and fuel trucks stationary, northern end of the Tagaw Valley. Looks like a T-break." Brenner felt the adrenaline spike, clean and sharp. "Roger, Scout." Viking flight, pushing in for a closer look. "Stay high." He nudged the cyclic forward, and the Apache nosed down, descending into the valley's mouth. The world tilted. The gun sight in his helmet-linked display painted the scene below, greenish-gray vehicles, tiny figures milling about. His thumb rested on the weapon select button, the chain gun armed and ready. This was the moment. The Apache was in its element, a predator scanning the herd. He was about to key the mic to report to command when he heard it. A sound that didn't belong. Not the steady roar of the engines or the whip of the rotors, but a high-pitched metallic scrape, followed instantly by a sickening, wrenching crunch. The entire airframe shuddered, a violent, jarring tremor that ran through the controls and into his bones. "What the hell was that?" Cross yelled from the front seat. Before Brenner could answer, a chorus of warning lights erupted across the instrument panel. A master caution alarm blared in their helmets. His eyes darted across the displays. Transmission oil pressure was dropping. Rapidly, the number 1 engine turbine temperature was spiking into the red. The vibration in the controls worsened, a bone-shaking buzz that made the cockpit gauges blur. "We've got a catastrophic failure." "Something like go," Brenner barked, his training overriding the primal fear. The Apache was now a wounded animal, shaking itself apart. He immediately pulled up on the collective, reducing the load on the rotors, and rolled the throttle for the ailing number 1 engine to idle. But the damage was done. The transmission, starved of oil or damaged by whatever had shattered inside, was seizing. "Mayday, mayday, mayday. Viking 2-1, we have catastrophic mechanical failure. We're going down. Position is north mouth of Tagaw Valley." Brenner's voice was calm, a stark contrast to the screaming machine around him. The world outside became a sickening carousel. The valley wall, moments ago a distant panorama, now rushed toward them. The controls were sluggish, the vibration apocalyptic. Smoke, acrid and oily, began to seep into the cockpit. Brenner fought the dying beast, trying to auto-rotate, to use the unpowered rotor's momentum to cushion the fall. But the Apache was heavy, and they had no forward speed. "Brace! Brace! Brace!" he shouted across. The last thing Chief Warrant Officer Mike Brenner saw was the hard, rocky earth spinning up to meet them. The impact was not a crash, but a terrible, final embrace of noise and force. Then, nothing but dust, silence, and the faint crackle of dying electronics. The silence was absolute, and In that silence, pain announced itself. It was a symphony of aches, centered in his ribs and shoulder. A sharp, coppery taste filled his mouth. Brenner blinked, his vision swimming. The world was tilted at a 45-degree angle. He was hanging in his harness, the cockpit a crumpled sculpture of broken glass, twisted metal, and spilled hydraulic fluid. The acrid stench of smoke and fuel was overwhelming. "Cross. Andy, you copy." His own voice sounded muffled, distant. A groan came from the front seat. Yeah, I'm here. Leg stuck. Hurts like hell." Relief, cold and thin, washed over him. They were alive. The immediate next threat pushed aside the pain. Fire. He could hear the hiss of leaking fluids. He had to get them out. With a grunt, he released his harness and fell against the shattered side window. He kicked at it, and the already weakened plexiglass gave way. Cold, clean air flooded in, diluting the smoke. He clawed his way out, his flight suit snagging on sharp edges, and tumbled onto the rocky ground. Every movement was fire. Ignoring it, he scrambled to the front of the wreck. Cross was pinned, his leg trapped between the collapsed instrument panel and his seat. His face was pale, slick with sweat. "Can't feel my foot, Mike." "Hold on, buddy. Just hold on." Brenner's mind raced. He could hear the rotor blades of Viking 2 circling overhead. The pilot's voice steady, calming presence in his earpiece, which miraculously still worked. "Viking 2-1, we see you. Crash site is secure for now. Kiowas are scrambling for a medevac. Hold tight." Help was coming, but the convoy they were sent to hunt was less than 5 miles away. The Soviets would have heard the crash, seen the smoke. They would come to investigate, to capture or kill. They had minutes, maybe less. He found a piece of broken rotor blade, a carbon fiber strut, and used it as a lever. With a strength born of sheer desperation, he pried at the metal entombing Cross's leg. It groaned, shifted slightly. Cross screamed a raw, torn sound. Again, Brenner heaved, muscles screaming in protest. With a final, metallic shriek, the panel gave way enough for Cross to pull his leg free. It was clearly broken, the flight boot already swelling. Dragging Cross to a safe distance from the wreck, Brenner propped him against a large rock. He grabbed their survival gear, the emergency radio, their rifles. His eyes kept scanning the valley rim. Every shadow seemed to move. The adrenaline that had fueled the rescue was ebbing, leaving behind a hollow, cold dread. They were 2 injured men in the middle of hostile territory, next to a giant beacon of a wreck. Back at Bagram, the news had hit the operations center like a physical blow. A pilot down, not to enemy fire, but to a sudden, catastrophic mechanical failure. The safety officer, a major with a permanently grim expression, was already assembling a team. Sergeant Kowalski, hearing the code over the hangar loudspeaker, felt his blood turn to ice. His bird, his pilots. He ran to the ops center, but was held at the door. The investigation had already begun, and he was a person of interest. Within hours, a recovery team, protected by a company of infantry, had secured the crash site. The wreckage of the Apache was a heartbreaking sight. The airframe was cracked behind the cockpit, the rotors snapped and scattered. The cause of the crash seemed obvious, a massive failure in the forward transmission area. But why? The maintenance logs were pulled. The technical directive for the gun inspection was highlighted. Everyone who had touched the aircraft in the last 48 hours was interviewed. Kowalski sat in a sterile interrogation room, repeating his steps. "I cleaned it by the book. I lubed it with 87177. I closed it up. It was perfect. Did you use any non-standard materials? Anything not in the manual?" The investigating officer pressed. Kowalski thought of the white shop rag. It was so trivial, so innocent. A piece of cloth to keep the dust off. It couldn't possibly matter. It would have been incinerated in the first second of the gun firing, a non-event. He saw the suspicion in the officer's eyes. Admitting to using an unapproved cover might end his career, might even see him blamed for the crash. Fear, cold, and rational clamped his mouth shut. "No, sir. Strictly by the book." The wreckage was hauled back to Bagram in pieces. In a secure hangar, a team of engineers from the Apache program manager's office began the painstaking task of reconstruction. They laid out the parts like a grim jigsaw puzzle. The transmission was indeed destroyed, but it was a victim, not the cause. The trail led them forward to the area where the transmission met the intermediate gearbox that drove not just the rotors, but also the hydraulic pumps and the gun's drive motor. An engineer named Callahan, a man with glasses and an obsessive attention to detail, was tracing the path of failure. He removed the mangled covers from the chain gun's drive system. The motor was damaged, the gears locked solid. Using tweezers, he picked through the debris inside the housing. Metal shavings, pieces of shattered gear teeth, and something else. Something that wasn't metal. A fragment of charred, fibrous material, fused to a piece of the broken drive chain. He carefully bagged it. In the lab, under a microscope, it was unmistakable cotton, and it showed a clear, greasy impression of the chain link pattern. His blood ran cold. He understood instantly. A cloth, saturated with the thin Mil 87177 grease, had been sucked into the moving chain of the gun mechanism. But the gun never fired. So how? He went back to the maintenance logs. The gun was cleaned, lubed, and the systems were tested on the ground. The test was a simple dry cycle. The gun's motor would run, moving the chain and bolt but without ammunition. It was a functional check. He imagined the sequence. The panels are closed. The pilot powers up the aircraft. The gun system is armed. During the ground test, the motor engages. The chain moves. It grabs the grease-soaked rag, pulling it tightly into the narrow guide rail channel. The cloth jams, the mechanism solid instantly. But the powerful electric drive motor, designed to overcome resistance, doesn't know this. It strains. It pulls immense current. Callahan followed the electrical schematics. The gun drive motor drew power from the same hydraulic electrical system that powered crucial flight controls. The sudden, massive current draw from the stalled motor created a power spike. This spike fried a critical solenoid valve in the hydraulic system governing the swash plate, the mechanism that controls the rotor blade pitch. The valve failed in a way that sent an uncontrolled surge of hydraulic pressure to the rotor head at the exact moment Brenner nosed the helicopter over. It was the equivalent of yanking the steering wheel of a car at full speed and having it lock. The violent, uncontrolled input from the swash plate sent a shock wave of stress through the entire rotor system and straight into the transmission. The transmission, 承受着突如其来的剧烈冲击, catastrophically failed within seconds. The chain reaction was diabolical. A cloth rag, meant to protect, had become a deadly key. It had unlocked a hidden, catastrophic flaw in the Apache's integrated systems, a single point of failure no designer had ever anticipated. The report was damning in its technical clarity. The cause of the crash was FOD, foreign object damage, a grease-saturated cotton shop rag left in the gun mechanism, which induced a cascading systems failure. The recommendation was immediate. A modification to the gun's access panels to prevent anything from being left inside, and a stark warning added to all maintenance manuals. Do not use any foreign materials to cover or protect components. Ensure mechanism is clear before closing panels. For Brenner and Cross, recovering in a hospital in Germany, the news was a bitter pill. Their lives had been shattered by a shop rag. The Army, in its way, moved on. The Apache fleet was modified. Briefings were held. The incident was filed away as a tragic lesson learned. Sergeant Kowalski was never formally charged. The evidence was circumstantial, and he stuck to his story. But the weight of his secret was a heavier punishment than any court-martial. He looked into the eyes of Brenner and Cross when they returned, limping, to the unit months later. He saw the permanent shadow in Brenner's gaze, the slight tremor in Cross's hand. He had meant no harm. He had only tried to do his job too well. The guilt ate at him, a silent companion. He requested a transfer to a different unit, away from aircraft maintenance. He couldn't bear the sight of an Apache, the smell of grease, the whiteness of a simple shop rag. Years later, long after they had all left the Army, Brenner would sometimes wake in the dark, the phantom shudder of the failing controls vibrating in his bones. He would think of that chain reaction, the cloth, the grease, the motor, the valve, a Rube Goldberg machine of disaster. It taught him a profound and unsettling truth, that in the complex, interlinked systems of the modern world, safety is a fragile illusion. It can be undone not just by malice or enemy action, but by a moment of misguided diligence, by a tiny unseen patch, resting silently in the dark, waiting for its moment to stop a pilot in his tracks.